While one of the main benefits of bullet journaling is that it's an all-in-one system, there are still some things that I just don't think it's well suited for. I've been bullet journaling since 2016, and there are still some parts of my organization system that I don't like to keep in my bullet journal. In today's video, we're going to look at what they are and why I don't include them in there, so let's have a look. The first type of information that I need to organize but I don't keep in my bullet journal is the communication of shared plans. This would be any kind of plan that I make with my partner, Vogel in particular, and we both need to be able to access that information, so having it in my journal just doesn't really make sense. Yes, I can add it to my calendar, and often I do, but to make sure that we're both on the same page with when and where we need to be places, I instead like to store that information in an Outlook calendar. The benefits of having this in Outlook, or possibly in somewhere like Google Calendar, is that it's easily shareable. We can sync that calendar to both of our individual calendar spaces, which can also be very helpful when it comes to making individual plans. I know when and where I'm supposed to be places with him, so I can organize my other personal life areas around those. Another reason I like to keep it in there is because that information is often subject to change. It's often enough that we have to move plans around for one reason or another, and doing this in a paper bullet journal kind of format often leads to a bit of mess. Yes, there are ways to record information in our planners where you don't have to have that mess. You can use things like pencil, erasable pens, sticky notes, anything like that. But having it in a digital space, that movability is really useful. Another benefit of having this via Outlook is that it can be very easy to add additional information to those events. For instance, confirmation emails we receive can be attached to the event that we've stored in the calendar. You can also have things like map addresses, URLs. Color coding is also a big one that I like to use, so being able to see at a glance what type of events I have across my calendar. For instance, which ones are social events where we're going to be spending time with other people versus which ones are more like appointments or home maintenance projects. Another reason that I like to have this on my digital calendar rather than in my journal is because of recurring events. Rather than having to write those in time and time again, I can just set one up on the digital calendar and put in that it recurs with a set frequency. As said, I do still bring a lot of that information into my personal bullet journal, but when it comes to actually sharing that information with somebody else, digital is the way to go for me. The second type of information that I don't really use my bullet journal to store is home maintenance notes. Yes, I do have a household projects list in my journal, but when it comes to the bigger notes about things in our household, things like paint colors, servicing dates, specific contractors that we like to use for particular types of projects, all of those things I like to store in OneNote. This is again so that it's shareable with my partner. He needs that information because oftentimes he's the one who's booking all of this stuff. But also I find that because a lot of this information is long-term information, I don't really like to store that in my everyday bullet journal either. If I'm storing it in my everyday bullet journal, it means that it would have to be transferred with each new journal I set up, or I could set it up in something like my long-term collections journal, but then we have that issue of shareability again. It's not going to be super accessible for my partner to access, so having that in a digital shared space is just a little bit better. When it comes to keeping track of our home maintenance and home care related information, we like to use OneNote, mainly because that's the system that Vogel is most familiar with, and because he's the one who uses the information the most often, we keep it in there for him. The third type of information that I need to organize and also don't like to store in my bullet journal is another one that goes in OneNote as well. This is again because it's a type of information that Vogel uses quite a lot, so having it in a space that he's familiar and comfortable with is necessary. And that one would be our recipes. Vogel loves to cook, I enjoy cooking, but I just don't do it quite as much as he does. But rather than keeping a zillion different cookbooks and printouts and pieces from magazines all scattered around the place, we like to have all of that information centralized on OneNote as well. One of the main reasons that I don't put this in my journal or in any kind of paper-based system is One, I don't want to have to rewrite all of the recipes or print them out and stick them in. That just sounds like a lot of effort. And two, I also just don't want to take those into the kitchen, especially because the kitchen is a place that gets kind of messy. I don't want to accidentally put the journal down in something that it shouldn't be placed in. OneNote, on the other hand, I can access from my phone, which I pretty much always have on hand, so I can just quickly whip that out, look up the things I need to do for the recipe, and then get started. This is another one where we can use URLs to link back back to the source for a recipe and also include pictures that we've either got offline or actually taken photos of the food we've made and put that in there as well. It's nice to have the visual aspect when it comes to a lot of recipes, at least I find. Another reason that I find having this information digital is preferable to having it in my journal is for when you need to make changes. Yes, I can copy out a recipe, word for word from some kind of source material, but oftentimes after I've made the recipe a few times, I do like to make tweaks and changes based on personal preferences. Rather than having to scratch things out in my kind of handwritten version of a recipe, I can just go in, change the text, type it up, and then the recipe is how I like it to be. Yes, as said, there are ways to do things in a paper-based format where you don't have to make them messy, we don't have to scratch things out, but I like writing in pen, and I like writing in pen with a good quality of black, and I'm yet to find an erasable solution that fits the bill. That combined with the fact that I don't like excessive handwriting, so handwritten recipes aren't really my thing, even though they look cute and make for very nice family heirlooms, but that's besides the point. The next category of information that I think is not as well served in my bullet journal as it could be is probably the biggest one, and that's because it relates to my job, and that is content planning. For my content planning, I like to use Notion, again because I get to move things around. I find that my video schedule does change kind of frequently, so being able to drop and drag things into different days so that I know when they're coming out is very useful. And yes, I do include some information regarding this in my bullet journal, but that's mainly just transferred from Notion into my physical planner on a kind of month-by-month basis. When it comes to long-term planning of my content calendar, Notion is going to handle that. And I also find that because you can add so much more information in Notion, that's where I'll do things like scripting and planning titles and planning out thumbnails in kind of like the general sense. All of that information can add up to quite a lot of text, and I find that typing it is easier than handwriting it. At least for me. Another reason that I prefer Notion to my bullet journal for storing this information is that I can view the same information in different ways without having to rewrite it. If I want a calendar view, I can have that. If I want a Kanban board view so I can see the progress that I made on each of my videos, I can have that different presentation without having to go and re-add the same information in. I for sure know that I am completely underutilizing the functionality of Notion and I would like to learn more about it, but the fifth type of information that I again do not include in my bullet journal is another one that's really important, and that's my financial tracking. Sure, yes, you can set up a financial tracker in your bullet journal, have things like an expense log and a budget plan, and we do have separate videos on the channel that show you some of the layouts you could use for that, but I personally prefer to not have to do math myself. Like, don't get me wrong, I like math, but if I can get the computer to do it for me, I'm gonna take that shortcut. For my financial tracking, I instead use a simple setup in Excel, where I have a simple log where I just record the date, what the expense was, the general category it falls into, and how much it was, and then all of the math is taken care of by Excel. I have different formulae in there to add up the total per month, for the whole year, to give me kind of an output of how much I spent versus how much I earned, and all of that is taken care of without me having to do a thing myself. I also have a bill splitter in there, which makes it really easy to split things like shipping or delivery costs if we're kind of going in on a takeout order together, anything like that. And the template that I use is purchasable through my little shop if you too want to keep track of your finances but don't want to have to add things up yourself. That one's linked in the description box below. I'd be keen to hear if there's any information that you don't like using your bullet journal to organize, so let me know in the comments. But notably, most of the tools that I use for organization outside of my bullet journal are digital. If you wanted to hear more about the digital tools that I swear by, then this video is the next one to check out. In that one, we cover some of the ones we've already talked about, but one of them might come as a bit of a surprise, so click or tap on that one and I'll see you over there.